Welcome, everyone. Okay, let's just dive right into this. Have you ever read an ancient text and felt like, wow, this is describing something incredibly deep about how the universe actually works? But the language just feels like this giant mystery? Well, today in this explainer, we're going to look at decoding those ancient texts. And no, we are not using a crystal ball for this. We're looking at them through a sharp, modern, and highly scientific lens called informational physics. We're going to explore how humanity's oldest spiritual metaphors actually map perfectly onto modern science. It's a seriously fascinating journey, so let's get into it.
So, here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to cover ancient words, informational physics, the belief systems tool, global traditions, real-world impact, and finally, how you can literally go and try this free tool for yourself.
All right, Section 1, Ancient Words, Hidden Meanings. So here is the big question. Did ancient writers secretly know physics? I mean, when we read about creation, light, balance, and order in texts written thousands of years ago, it can sometimes feel eerily accurate to modern science, right? Like, were they secretly out there doing advanced calculus in the desert? Well, no, obviously not. But as we'll see, they were observing the exact same universe we are today. They just had a totally different toolkit to describe it.
See, ancient people didn't have words for modern concepts like entropy flow, which is really just a fancy way of measuring disorder, or non-local fields. But they did have words for light, breath, water, and fire. When they wanted to describe formless potential, they talked about water, or the vast sea. When they wanted to describe a moving, invisible force, they talked about the wind, or breath. They used these universal, everyday metaphors to intuitively describe the actual physical dynamics of the universe.
Which brings us to Section 2, Enter Informational Physics. Let's see how all of this builds into our modern understanding.
Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty details, it is absolutely essential to credit the mind behind this entire framework. The concepts and the incredible custom AI tool we're discussing today were developed by Kevin L. Brown. He's a researcher, inventor, and author who essentially realized, hey, we can actually translate ancient symbolism directly into modern physics.
So the crucial point here is understanding what this framework actually is. Informational physics is basically the study of how the universe organizes information. It shows how order naturally emerges from chaos. Think about it simply. When ancient texts talk about light pushing away darkness, informational physics looks at that and sees order and clarity pushing away uncertainty and noise. It's not about trying to turn spirituality into cold, boring math. It's about seeing that both systems are trying to describe the exact same natural laws of the universe. Moving on to Section 3, the Belief Systems Translator. This is where things get super practical. To make this work, Kevin L. Brown developed a custom AI GPT tool to systematically decode things using a four-step process. First up, it identifies the key symbolic elements in a text, stuff like water or fire. Second, it figures out the informational role of that specific symbol. For example, fire almost always represents rapid transformation. Third, it maps the transformation taking place, like moving from a state of chaos to a state of order. And finally, step 4, it translates the whole passage into neutral field-based language. Basically, it takes ancient poetic words and turns them into a really clear explanation of how information and energy flow.
Next up, Section 4, Translating Global Traditions. Because honestly, the true test of any framework like this is whether it actually works impartially across totally different cultures.
And spoiler alert, it absolutely does. The Belief Systems Translator handles a massive, incredibly diverse historical data set. It's been used to translate the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, the Quran, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Tao Te Ching. And what's really amazing here is that the tool doesn't take sides. It doesn't try to prove one religion right and another one wrong. Instead, it impartially finds the exact same underlying patterns of reality in all of them. Let's look at a really famous example to show you what I mean. You probably know this quote from Genesis 1:3, "And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." Now that is a beautiful, highly poetic image, right? But how would this look mathematically? What is the actual physical dynamic being described there? Well, here is what the Belief Systems Translator outputs. It translates "let there be light" as the introduction of a stable informational gradient, the birth of usable information. Think of it like turning on a flashlight inside a pitch-black cave. Suddenly, boom, you have a contrast between light and dark.
In physics and in computing, you literally can't have meaning or information without that contrast. So the ancient writers intuitively grasped that the birth of the universe required the birth of usable information. Okay, let's jump to a completely different culture just to see the universal applicability of this tool. This is a famous quote from the Tao Te Ching, chapter 42. It says, "The Tao produces one, one produces two, two produce three, three produce all things." Now, that sounds very mystical on the surface, right? But let's run it through the translator. Just look at how clearly this decodes. The tool translates this as a basic informational cycle: emergence, then contrast, then integration. The one is the primary pattern emerging. The two is polarity and contrast, just like separating light from dark. The three is the feedback loop that integrates them, which then goes on to produce complex systems or all things. It's describing a tri-phase harmonic dynamic, which is essentially just a three-step cycle of balance that creates everything around us. It proves that the underlying patterns of creation are totally identical, whether you're reading a text from the ancient Middle East or ancient China. Moving to section 5, real-world implications. We've seen the translations, but you might be wondering, why does decoding these ancient texts actually matter for humanity today? Well, this work has some pretty profound impacts. First off, it unifies human experience across cultures. It shows us that right beneath our different traditions, we actually share a common understanding. Second, it identifies universal patterns of reality. People all across the globe notice the exact same things about balance, harmony, and order. And third, it translates ancient metaphor into modern math. It's a great reminder that our ancestors weren't just making up stories. They were watching the same universe we are, just from the inside. If you take away just one thing from this explainer today, let it be this. Lived human experience was our very first lab, and symbolism was our first notation system. Ancient writers were not using magic. They were just using the only tools they had, stories, metaphors, and symbols, as a precursor to the modern equations that we use today. They were feeling the structure of the universe. We are just simply giving it a mathematical name. And finally, section 6, try the free tool. Now, I know this is a lot of incredible information to take in all at once, but you don't just have to take my word for it. You can actually interact with this framework yourself. Yup, Kevin L. Brown has actually made this custom GPT available for anyone to use. You can experience the Belief Systems Translator completely for free by visiting creationunified.com. Seriously, go check it out. You can paste in a passage from any text you find inspiring, or maybe even a little confusing, and just watch the AI map it onto universal informational patterns right before your eyes. Think about it. We are the very first generation in history that can read ancient texts, simulate quantum fields, and build AI models all at the exact same time. So I'll leave you with this final question to chew on. What will you discover when you translate the past? Head over to creationunified.com, try the free tool, and see for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll catch you next time.